Hey there, hope you're doing well. And today we'll take a look at a very basic. I don't even think I can call it an application. A very basic set of files, if you will, right? But it's essentially a .NET application. And you might be, if you're wondering, oh my God, is Krish really going to share something about .NET? And if you're surprised, it's likely you worked with me in the past, and it's completely understandable. I'm a polyglot engineer. I've done work across a number of stacks, but not .NET isn't one of them, right? In other words, nobody's ever paid me to do .NET work, not as yet. Maybe it'll happen in future. I haven't actually looked out for it. So it's typically been just about everything else. But off late, for a different reason, I was just curious to look at where .NET is at this point of time, and how it relates to someone like I, who comes from a Java or Ruby or JavaScript-ish background. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to share my experience with you, right? Again, I come to these sessions not particularly prepared. It's just I'm very impromptu as a person, and if you watch my videos and podcasts, you're probably aware of that. So let's see how it goes, right? And again, I don't shudder to not know something even when I'm on video. And given the fact that I've been interviewing the last couple of weeks, I've become even more comfortable at that. So let's see how it goes, right? I honestly can't believe I'm doing a video on a .NET application as simple and rudimentary as it is. Okay, let's get started without further ado. I work on my MacBook, right? I'm a Mac-ish developer, meaning that's my dev machine, has been for most of my career. And my deployments have been on Linux, Unix/Linux servers, right, over the years. Again, in all aspects of it, I'm new to .NET, right? Writing C# code or F#, which I know even less about, or deploying it, or when you talk about Azure, I'm more familiar with like AWS, and the next in line would be Google Cloud, and way far off is like Azure, right? I've got almost no experience. I could actually say that it's very, very little. Okay, so let's get started, right? So I had to do a bunch of installations. I don't remember all of it, but I can share. This is not actually the whole history of commands. Yeah, it took me a little bit to get .NET installed on my Mac. I believe Microsoft actually does support it. I don't know if they did in the past, but it certainly is supported because you're seeing my Mac desktop. But with that said, I did run into issues. It was certainly not seamless. I mean, not by any stretch of the imagination, right? But unfortunately, I don't exactly know what I do. It's been a week or maybe even a little bit further, when I actually did the initial setup here. But let's try to run some of these commands, right? We can even see, yeah, this is the latest version. I believe the previous version was like 5, the major version. Obviously, this is 6. It's got to have been 5. But what I mean is this one might have been not too old. It's probably very current in that sense. So I did go through some hoops to get it installed and running on my machine. Hopefully, this is actually recording. Yeah, I hope. Once I got it installed, the first thing I tried to do was try to get it running on Visual Studio, right? That's kind of, their recommended editor, if you will, not VS Code, but actually Visual Studio. So I tried to go here and I clicked New, and I just picked, I went to Web and Console, and then I picked Web API, right? See what happens when I click Next. It's trying to do something. Maybe it failed, right? There is an exception somewhere, so it just hangs, right? So I doubt there was one scenario where I was able to get this to work, but it was again very atypical, so I don't know what I actually had to do, but it does not work, unfortunately. To tell you that it's only that API, I can tell you I'll pick something else, right? Like a blank app, for instance. A lot of the other things work, but for my initial look and feel, I typically go with the API side of things, just because I relate to the server side a bit more than the UI, because it gives me a better insight into how a system actually does work. The rest of them actually might work for all I know, even if I went to like iOS and app and maybe picked a tabbed app and go next. Yeah, it seems to be all right. I guess it just doesn't, and maybe at some point this will. That's strange. Okay, what was that? There's a bunch of empty space here. So yeah, this editor, I guess it's meant to work on OS X. Maybe, I don't know how many people actually use it, but it clearly has bugs. I mean, there's a saying in my language where it's like a morsel of rice is a reflection of what's in the pot, and this is no different. I was not convinced. So anyway, so I don't want to spend more time there. So I just installed Rider, which is a JetBrains editor, and I use them for a lot of my work across stacks, essentially, right? And I think that worked just fine. So I created a basic .NET app, and again, this to someone who's a Java developer in my past life, this sounds a bit like, it's like Rails, and there was a framework called Play. Maybe it's not even still around. I don't know. Java Play framework. I used it like literally a decade ago, I think. Oh, maybe it's still there. I don't know what the state is. This was basically poor man's version of Ruby on Rails, if you will, for Java. So I think that's what I remember out of this. Like, it's got scaffolds and commands to get you started and up and running quickly. Almost like, what is it? Just like the Spring Boot projects and so on, right? So .NET actually has these commands. So you could just do a .NET new, and then you can create an application, right? You can just specify the language. I believe the default is like C#, but if you want to use like F#, you could use that as well. F#, as I understand, is the most succinct version of C#, maybe, right? It to me it looked like maybe it's Java versus Kotlin. Maybe it's not the best of analogies, but that's what it looked like to me. So there is these commands, and I mean it's pretty good. It's well documented, right? So it's good. Maybe it's a bit verbose on occasions, but yeah, but nothing in particular. But I think it's good documentation and some language to know. SLN, I believe, is a solution. It's like the project level thingy, is what I can imagine. Yeah, it's a .NET solution file. And then you have, let's just dig straight into the code, right? So I created a basic application through the command line. Unfortunately, that command doesn't seem to be here. I most certainly did a .NET create, and I know I just created the scaffold, and you see this here. So let's just work backwards, right? Let's just ignore all the code, and then let's just run it. Let's see what happens. So I have a configuration here. It says web application 2. The path is pointing to net 6.0 web app 2.dll. The target framework is 6.0. And we'll come back to this app URL. One of the initial issues I ran into was, I think the default is like 5150 maybe. I can't remember. What happened was, I think when I started Visual Studio, maybe, not Rider, but Visual Studio, or when I actually ran, the .NET framework is running on the machine and then you're running the app, there was a conflict of the port number. The default port did not work for me, right? It said there was a conflict, but that was the first time I was actually even doing anything using .NET. It took me like a few minutes, and I was like, you know what, let me just change the port number. So I changed it to something else. And again, this is from a couple of weeks back, so I might be forgetting something, but if you're doing this, watch out for that, right? If you see a port conflict, just use a completely new port number, yeah. Okay, and now I'm going to run this. Okay, it starts up. Okay, so it's running on 7207, and you see the Swagger page that comes up. And now let's dig into the code a tiny bit, right? And all of this is pretty much generated code. There's probably like 10 lines of that I actually may have even written. So that tells you that getting it up and running, it took a tiny bit of time because it's on Mac, and maybe it's not generally well supported on a MacBook, on OS X. But outside of that, I think it was all right? Even for somebody who's never, ever done this before, and I don't understand the language necessarily, or the syntax or whatnot, it was all right. It was a matter of a couple of hours where I was able to get this running, install .NET framework, got it set up, installed Rider and Visual Studio, etc., etc. So 2 hours, 3 hours down, before we typically break our life down into sessions at Snowpal. By the way, if you haven't checked out our platform, definitely go to snowpal.com. Use it for all aspects of your life when it comes to project management, and everything in life is sort of a project in itself. And you can download the app from the app and Play stores as well. Definitely check it out if you haven't already done so. So at Snowpal, we actually break our life into sessions of 4 hours a piece. So most of what we do is broken down into a 4-hour session, because we think that that's good enough a time to create something that's meaningful. That doesn't mean it's complete. Definitely not.